Lahiri Mahashaya,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Swami Shri Yukteswar,
Swami Shri Yukteswar,
Paramhansa Yogananda Ji,
Paramhansa Yogananda Ji,
saints of all religions,
saints of all religions,
friend and guide,
friend and guide,
Swami Kriyananda.
Swami Kriyananda.
We lovingly bow before you all.
We lovingly bow before you all.
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
great masters,
great masters,
help us to come together tonight,
help us to come together tonight,
deeply attuned to your love and your teachings,
deeply attuned to your love and your teachings,
deeply attuned to each other,
deeply attuned to each other,
hearts wide open,
hearts wide open,
looking for your light,
looking for your light,
feeling your friendship,
feeling your friendship,
feeling you here to guide us home.
feeling you here to guide us home.
We are your children.
We are your children.
Guide us always
Guide us always
through your light,
through your light,
with your love,
with your love,
with your compassion,
with your compassion,
and your perfect understanding.
and your perfect understanding.
Oh,
Om
peace.
peace.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay. We should,
I think there's a seat there, Saranya, that's open.
are you good or do you want to come in further? Soren?
It's up to you. Do you, isn't there a seat right there? Yeah. Cozy. There you go.
I was thinking a lot about this class because particularly since COVID happened, we haven't been doing that much in person. And yet here we are, and so many great souls showing up for this class. And what I was thinking about it is, sounds like such a particular topic, death, dying, karma, reincarnation. And of course it is. And yet it's also allowed us, everybody who's been here or who's been watching for these last 2 weeks knows, to just dive so deep into the teachings, not just of this path, but the universal teachings that are our path, but that are every path. So it's been so deeply touching for me, I think for others, to feel whatever topic we embark on, and this of course is a particular one, it touches all of us in just a very unique and particular way, but we're able to keep finding that spark of light. We're able to keep our hearts open, to feel uplifted, even in the face of so much human pain and sadness and really tragedies. I mean, it's what a lot of this is, or crises. But still, even with this particular topic, each week, I just have a feeling of so much expansion and upliftment. So I feel really, I've been touched by that. Yeah.
Yeah, join the circle, Kevin. You can fit in there or come around here. Thank you, everyone. Making room.
So we'll do tonight like we've been doing it. We'll take the first 45 minutes to an hour, whatever, to see how it flows and what happens. Is there anybody here? Yes. You're here.
You're ready. You are here.
So we're going, James is heading right now, or Dhananjaya has the mic. I'm going to remind everybody, and we'll keep reminding you, the people who are Zooming in are having a very hard time hearing those of you because you don't keep the mic right next to your mouth. So Dhananjaya, can you give it to Robin? Robin Michelle. I'm sorry.
Bar, there's a spot here. You can come. I'm just gonna put. Yeah.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
James would know. I think
James, is this?
as long as it's near your mouth,
What
it'll
does your
be
cameraman say?
the best. Make him. I think he's given it thumbs up, but it's the best we're going to do anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you. A couple of quick things. One is how much this class applies, not just if there has been death, but if there's been any big loss.
Mhm.
And currently, my husband and I are dealing with that. We had my son and his family living with us for quite a while, very attached to granddaughters, and they moved to Maine, which is really far away.
Yeah.
And our hearts have been very sore. And I was thinking particularly the first night when you were saying things like, the relationship is new, right? Why is this happening? Those things that we were discussing on the first night felt like they just absolutely applied to any great loss that we may be experiencing.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a very meaningful point that you're making. And I think it's part of what I was alluding to, what I was just speaking about is that here we are, death, dying, karma, and reincarnation, but the essence of the spiritual teaching is there. And what a big loss that is. I realized that you wrote something either to me or to the group, I don't know, but I thought, boy, she really did go through. This is a huge loss that you're working your way through. So yeah, I'm glad you spoke to it tonight. And if you have more to say about it, that would be wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. The other thing I wanted to share is that I got to be with my dear friend of decades, Karen, when she was passing. I spent the last week with her in hospice. And the beauty of the gift of her death I wanted to share with the group. And I had spent the last couple of nights of her in-body existence with her there at hospice, being there most of the time. And in the middle of the night, everybody else had left and I was there with just another friend on the phone. And I looked over at her and she was very, very deep and close to passing. And I heard her voice very clear in my head. And she said, "I'm not here." So I was looking at her body in the bed.
Wow.
So I backed up my attention. And what I was aware of is that she was swaths of color and joy dancing in the room. Though yet her body was still going through the last phases of like birth that a body has to go through. She was swirling in the room and she had said to me so often in the last months, "Where's the joy?" And what I really felt her discovering then is that she is the joy.
Wow.
It's just such a huge gift.
Yeah.
And then after she had passed in the early morning and dark, and there was a double door onto the garden. And I stepped to the door and I opened the French door and stood looking at the moon, which had always been very special to her. And then as I stood there, I felt as if I was just a rock in a stream. And I felt all this energy whoosh past me and go through the door and up to the moon.
That's very beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I knew that she would like that to be shared with
I
you.
love that.
When did she pass?
This was in August of 2018.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robin Michelle. So beautiful.
You know, I want to just say something, but with tremendous sensitivity for people who are in the room who've not had that opportunity. Somebody that we love dearly leaves and we're not there. We can't be there. And that's just very painful. And I want to just say out loud that I'm aware of that. But when we are given the gift of being there, and it's, you just never know. I mean, when that will happen, it's, you just don't know. People have told me many times, I want to be with my mother or with my child or whoever when they go, when they're sick. But since we never know when they're going to leave, it's not in our hands. But it's such a beautiful and sacred moment when it can happen. And I love just what happened, because you're not just making this up. You saw this, you felt this. One of those very beautiful times as a soul leaves. And it's not excruciatingly painful in the moment. There's so much beauty in it. Yeah, and it is, as we'll talk about later, Yogananda said over and over that the most meaningful time in life are those last few minutes as somebody's getting ready to leave, almost regardless of how they've lived their life. But, and I don't know your friend, I'm sure she sounds like she was a very special woman, but to be able to see that she was swirls of light and color, and to experience those astral qualities, even while the body is still sitting there. It's just, it really brings to us what a really beautiful moment it can be as the soul transitions out, or as we were talking about it, the baby blessing for whoever was just there. We did a blessing for a woman who's going to have a baby in February, and she's an Indian woman. This is something that's not really done in India, but we held our version of a baby shower. Just saying, it's such an extraordinary moment when a soul's coming in or when a soul is leaving. So I really appreciate your bringing that here.
Yeah. Kevin and then Robin.
Kevin, make sure you keep it right up next to your mouth.
Did you raise your hand as well, Saranya? No. No. Okay.
Well, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer,
It's okay.
playing off that,
Yeah.
but I think if you're on, to me, a question and also a comment.
Mhm.
I was with my mother when she passed away, and I was young. I was like 26, but and I was not on a spiritual path.
Mhm.
And I can't say that it was exactly a beautiful moment.
Yeah.
Actually, right before she was passing, I was talking to her. She had lung cancer and it was in her brain, and so she really wasn't there. I was asking her about my father because she would never speak of him. Said he was dead. I didn't think he was. I never knew him, but I asked her that, and then she kind of, her eyes opened. And I mean, now as studying medicine and everything, I understand she was dying, but she looked so angry. The last I remember of her was that she was angry, and they had put her dentures back in for some stupid reason, and she was pushing them. Anyway, it was to me, a very unsettling and very scary.
Yeah.
And I thought I would never, ever get that vision of her out of my mind. I was really afraid of that. And I was waiting for her to come back and get mad at me for something. So I realized that that's probably a psychological thing that we had, but I wish I would have been on a spiritual path and I could have experienced something more beautiful than that. Just saying, if that has anything to do with how you perceive someone's passing.
Well, the one thing I'll say, Kevin, and I appreciate you sharing, is that, one of the things we talked about in the first two classes, so the soul doesn't die. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because the relationship, which Robin Michelle was talking about, like, okay, it's a new relationship. So that isn't your last opportunity to send love to your mom. It isn't your last opportunity to be in relationship with her. If that's right, so that her soul, whatever, I don't know what was going on for her. I don't know what she was experiencing. Death can be incredibly hard. It isn't always a beautiful, amazing scene. So I don't know if it's helpful at all, but I just want to say that, that moment, as you said, it's kind of seared into your consciousness, and it's one moment in in a lifetime journey of a soul, including your soul. So I don't know if ritual can be helpful sometimes. And the astral ascension ceremony can be said at any time, even years later. There can be a way of just saying, yeah, I'm just sending you love. Yogananda said the soul always will feel that wherever the soul is, to know that we really can still communicate energetically with our prayers, with our thoughts. Yeah. Yeah. You're welcome. Yeah.
I'd like to just add one quick thing to that. It's really very meaningful what Vivekadevi just said. So I don't want to neutralize any of it. I mean, I'm not saying anything counter to it, but just saying I was very thoughtful in my choice of words. So I want to say this to you. When I said to Robin Michelle, it can be such a beautiful, it's always sacred, but it can be so beautiful. But it isn't always beautiful. It just simply isn't. There's a lot of reasons people come and go with anger. I remember I said to Asha once in a discussion about people who have passed in our lives, I said, you know, my mother, who I was with when she passed, this was in a conversation many years later, but I said, I can't see that she ever learned one spiritual lesson. She made no spiritual progress in this life, as far as I could tell.
Mm-hmm.
She left in as contracted and diminished a state as she came in. That's what, I mean, I was her daughter, but it's what it looked like to me. And it was the truth. There was no part of her that was going to have any raised or expanded consciousness. So a lot of that personality stuff, anger, whatever it is, it was still with her. Asha's answer to me was very meaningful, but I'm saying it to you to say, I literally said that. How is it that somebody comes and makes no spiritual progress? It was unimaginable to me. Asha said to me, her great spiritual progress in this life was having you as her daughter. And that is true. But I can look around this room and say it for everybody here, that anybody who has us, conscious spiritual seekers, as a relative, never mind a daughter who was loving and devoted, in spite of who my mother was, it's who I was with her. So it was true what Asha said, but it was not easy for her to die. She wasn't pleasant. She had no sense of any great spiritual adventure going on. I have 4 other stories that just came to mind. I'm not going to tell them, but a very challenging deaths when the soul of that person or the personality wants to just hold on and struggle. So it can be this.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful when it's that, but people have to be ready. And then sometimes, and then everything Vivekadevi said, that's true. There will be other opportunities. And
Does that mean that that person's soul does not go on?
no, of course,
No matter how you leave, you still.
no matter how you leave, your soul is still on a journey, and it will. I wish Padmini had I sent her a quote today from Swamiji, but it's a very poignant quote, and it was poignant for her, given what she's been through in this last 2 years ago and up until 2 weeks ago. But no, every soul's on a journey. A soul has to come back to God. It has to find its way to pure love. It's just some souls are going to take all 10 million of those lives to do it, or however many there are. And some of us are really trying to make huge spiritual progress in each life, but we were there too. You know, I mean, we've all been there. Master said, whatever you see anybody doing, anything, whatever you see them doing, mobsters, I mean, thieves, whatever they are, you've already done it. Or he said, which is chilling, you still have to do it. And that's horrifying. But most of us in this room are not going to go back and do those things. But we've been there too. So no, there's every reason in the world to know for certain that anybody that you love, that you care about, no matter what it looks like here, they're on the same path we're on, just in a different place. So, Robin, did you?
I wasn't going to share anything, but I feel called to share this. I was with my dad when he passed, as well as my mom, but my dad was a spiritual investigator, but he wasn't really on a spiritual path of growth. He was curious about Jesus and but did he really exist? And he, he looked at all kinds of books and everything. So at the end of his life, he was very challenged with how to leave. And I was sitting with him and he was, in his shorts. This is so frustrating, he said. I don't get how to do this. And I looked at him and I said, Dad, it's not about you doing anything. It's about you surrendering. And he looked at me and he said, oh, okay. So then the next day, he started leaving and he laid on the bed and there was another whole thing where he was actually narrating a story of someone down the hall leaving. And when he came back, he was kind of in and out. And I said, Dad, that's really happening. She just died. And he was so surprised. But then he came back and it was just like, okay, got to get a drink of water. And then he came back and laid down. And the next morning, he started to leave. And I got there just as his breath was in and out and not consistent. And I held onto his feet. I just touched his feet and I could see him leaving. And he left and he came behind me watching his last breaths. And he goes, huh. And he was a doctor and a scientist. So his whole thing was in that analyzing everything. And so then he floated up to the top of his head and he started walking up this hill and he turned around, he goes, I'm done. And I said, okay, Dad, bye. And I could see him walking up toward my mother and my sister.
Wow.
And he joined them and he didn't believe they'd be there for him before he left. But when he saw them, he was like, oh, they're waiting.
Yeah.
And about a week later after his funeral, I was home back here in California and waking up, in the morning, and I could see him and my mom and my sister standing together. And he said, I made it.
Oh, wow.
And I said, great, Dad, I'm so glad.
Mhm.
So I could feel the grief, but I could also just feel the joy that he had
Yeah.
come into some kind of faith in his crossing over, which was great.
Yeah.
That's a very touching story. It's beautiful. Ah, thank you. People just like we all live in so many ways, we all die in so many ways. Yeah. And just even as unexpected as that was.
Extraordinary, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very beautiful.
My dad passed 6 weeks ago,
Mm.
and he and I had this sort of a rocky relationship. And I was just astounded at my reaction once he died, because I was sobbing and crying numerous times a day, every day for a couple of weeks. And I still get choked up sometimes. And
Yeah.
I don't really understand why,
Mhm.
but I was there when he passed. And he had a clock that every hour on the hour it would chirp. It were birds instead of numbers. And so every hour a different bird would sing its song. And he died at 6:55, but at 7 o'clock, it was supposed to be the whippoorwill, but it was an owl that hooted instead. And I felt that that was Dad saying goodbye, because when I was a teenager, he gave me a book called I Heard the Owl Call My Name.
Mm.
And it was about a priest who was dying of cancer. And so I found that all very special,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
But maybe you could say something about why I got so emotional and felt, instead of relief that the bully was gone, that I was just sad and crying.
You know, do you mind?
No, you
Speak.
go. Yeah, yeah.
Is that I want to say a couple of things to you. I have the great privilege of knowing almost everybody in this room pretty well, so I get to answer some of these things in ways that, I mean, not everybody could do this. But first of all, it's extraordinary for me to hear that your father gave you that book when you
Yeah.
were young. It really speaks to some of that push-pull, love-hate. I mean, all of what we would call it that was in your relationship, because that's a beautiful book. And then to have the owl come in as such a clear message to you, what is the likelihood that that would happen? You know, these things that happen that are just impossible outside of some divine intervention, really. But, and not but. And you can say if you think this isn't right, but whatever, even in the end, though you behaved so well those last weeks, months of your father's life, which you did, you put your anger down, you were able to be there with him, right? I mean, I watched that and respected that a great deal. There was a lot that you might have wanted from your father that you never got. And when they leave, when somebody's just gone, in that way, in this very physical, like I'm here, you're there, I can ask for what I want, I can fight for you, with you for what I want. All of that, it's gone. We know the soul isn't gone, but in this life, this physical reality, he's just gone now. So the opportunity to continue hoping that he could unconditionally love you, that goes. And that's sad. I think it's just really, to me, it feels sad, like an unfulfilled desire. So I'm saying to you, it makes perfect sense to me, at least for me. I mean,
Yeah.
that you would cry like that. I know you, so I know at some point you will take that deep, deep need that we all have to be loved. And it's what we're doing here. We're here to allow that energy to be transformed and transcendent, and to actually get to know there is only one place to have that unconditional, that kind of love that you wanted. And you'll find it because you're on a journey and because you're committed. I'm speaking really to you. But his leaving was a big, again, you tell me if I'm wrong, but it was a big blow to that. Like, can it come now? Can it come now? Will he see me now, who I really am? And I think there was a little bit of that with you, with your father towards the end, but a lot seemingly left. That level unfinished. I'm not saying it will stay unfinished, but
After he left, I could smell him.
Mm,
Okay, I knew he was coming to visit because I could smell him.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
He was sick for a long time, so it wasn't a very pleasant smell, but but I knew he was there.
Yeah.
After mom died and she came to visit, I could smell her perfume.
Mhm.
So, Dhananjaya, I think I would say to you, listen with your heart, particularly now, and see if from where he is, he might be able to tell you what you'd like to hear. That's what I think. Free of his judgments and his opinions and all of that intense Maya. If he's freer, he may well be able to give you what you always want. I mean, if he's coming around anyway, don't just focus on his smell is what I'm saying.
Mhm.
Greet him with your heart. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have something to share and then a question too.
Bonnie,
Oh,
There we
okay,
go.
better?
Yeah.
I have found that being so far away from, so I have not been there when somebody very close to me has died, actually. So there was only one time I was with a person who died, it was my uncle in LA. But when my parents died in India, I was here. So I've always found that to be heart-wrenching because it's not the same as being there. But the thing that I found interesting, which I think I've been hearing about the sharing as to how you can still communicate with the soul, whether they're there. I had that experience when my father died. I mean, he wasn't well, but it was nothing critical, we thought anyway. But a week before his actual death, I had a dream. I mean, at least it felt like a dream that like my brother was visiting me and we were doing something. And then I get a call from my sister telling me the news about my dad dying. And she share this with, because she knew that he was going to be there. So tell him also and I'll talk to him too. So I felt very uncomfortable about this so I didn't tell anybody anything because this was not something that was, But the thing is, one thing is, I was very, very attached to my father. We both had a very loving bond. And then after the first few years, I went maybe once in 2-3 years, but after that, I was going every year to see them. That was my like an annual pilgrimage because I wanted to see my parents as long as they were there. But the thing was, exactly a week later, and my brother was visiting me, but it was like he was there in Chicago for a conference. And he came and he left this was like a Tuesday evening, he left. Wednesday early morning, I get a call from my sister. The thing was, the words were exactly what I had heard. It was like I just could not believe it in the sense of, So then when I went to India and I told my mom, see, this is what happened. It just was like, she said, she was like, took it in a very, like a sort of expected kind of a thing. She said, oh, well, I thought that he knew. I mean, she said, oh, he knew that you would be the most heartbroken of all the three of you, and you would have a tough time dealing with it. So I felt that he might send you a message in some way. I mean, she took it, which I had not thought of. But I did struggle for 6 months. But again, around 6 months, one night I felt him I could actually see him too in the door. I mean, telling me, what is this? After knowing all these things, but we all have to go. How long are you going to grieve for me? I'm just doing fine. It's time to move on. I mean, in his, he was very much like that, very outspoken, very, not very I mean, he was affectionate and all that, but he would not show it, not very emotional kind of a person. But actually, somehow after that, I felt so good. I mean, I mean, in the sense of my grief seemed to have decreased significantly. And everybody's like, what happened in 2 days? Because you've been, So I definitely do believe that they have a way of communicating. And I also believe that even if they are reborn, incarnated in something, there is, from my understanding, there is not, I mean, they can still be in multiple places. It's
Yes.
not 100%
Yes.
of the soul is reborn anyway. So that's my belief. So this is just the experience that I had, which, makes me very sure that, yeah, irrespective of whether they're here or there, there is still some connection. But the thing that what I still don't understand though is just about a year before that, my uncle passed away in LA. He was on the respirator and he was not responding. And so I was in Chicago. So I came, I flew and I went. But it was, a lot of people were there when he passed away. But of course he couldn't recognize, we all did our part and, and saying this, we have always been told that to tell in the ear the Narayana's name, God's name.
You're the what?
God's name,
Okay.
and which is like I use mostly Narayana. I mean, it's like the Vishnu's,
Sure.
this one, Krishna is one avatara, but the Vishnu is the main one. So the thing is, it was very difficult for me to get any of the soul's transition, to be honest. It was almost like, I think we were just watching that breath, like when it would suddenly stop. Is it different for when people are on a respirator or, versus they have a natural death? That's a question. I don't know. I mean, whether anybody feels that or whether I was more ignorant or whatever. I don't know. It just seemed very different for me,
You go.
You remember the story that I've told that, somebody asked Swamiji in a Q&A about, gosh, I have the question right on my computer. I'll ask Lakshmi to open it up later because it's a Q&A that's listed at the end of this beautiful, beautiful essay that Swami wrote called The Final Exam. If you haven't read it, I think most people here probably have, but if you haven't, it's really worth reading. He dives into...
I have it if you want it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in one of the Q&As, there's some question that's asked about somebody in a coma or drugs, I forget. And Swamiji said, I'm not sure. So I'm saying this to you for a reason. He said, but I tend to think it would have to do with the level of consciousness of the person leading up to this moment, like how drugs would affect it or something. So I don't want to speak with such assurance, but if Swamiji didn't know, I could say, what do I know? But I've had some experiences, and one of them, which I think speaks to this, is the experience that I had that many of you have heard me talk about when I was a nurse in the intensive care unit and we were resuscitating a man. So I was the head nurse and there were all these doctors. And I've said many times, nurses in the ICU often really run the show. Now there's what we call intensivists. In those days, they didn't exist. So they were the interns and residents from the hospital. They didn't know at all what we knew. So they would come and they'd be like this, and we'd be saying, now do this, now do that. We'd be running the care. And so this patient who I'd been taking care of for many days had a cardiac arrest, and we were resuscitating him. And I kept getting the feeling that we should keep going. And the doctors wanted to stop, and they kept wanting to stop. And I kept saying, we can't stop. And that was very powerful for them. that I was saying it because of the way the intensive care units work in those days. At some point, and I know many of you have heard this story, I look up into the right-hand corner of the room. Guy's name was John, and he's up there and he's looking down at me. Now, I was about 22 or 23. I mean, it blew my mind. It was like, oh my God, because nobody was talking about these things then. You have to know this was 50 years ago, more than 50. It just wasn't the way it is now. But I saw him up there and I looked at him like this. And remember, I've told this story, he winked at me with his right eye. He winked like that. And I say to the doctors, we are not stopping. And they say to me, but his pupils are fixed and dilated, meaning he's brain dead. And I said, we are not stopping. I mean, I was so strong about it. Anyway, we resuscitated him. He came back and he was on a respirator. And the next day, so here he is floating around the room, winking at me. And then we bring him back when he was clinically brain dead. And then the next day, I come to work the next night. And I just remember it like it happened yesterday. I went up and I grabbed his hand and, you know, his eyes are sort of open. He's on a respirator. He's not exactly looking like a rose, but he was alive. It was his own heartbeat. And I said, how you doing, John? And he just looked at me and then he gives me that same wink with his right eye. It was very compelling. Anyway, he lived. And it was the first of then many powerful, impossible, as far as I had ever been taught in nursing school or in terms of anything I was ever taught in medical school. But I realized that so much of what happens has to do with not are they on a respirator or not how many drugs we have to give them, because we do have to give people. Where is the consciousness of that soul? And that soul's consciousness, which I had never heard what Swamiji said until today when I was reading in that
Q&A, if you want to find it.
yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much quoting it,
Yeah,
but
you don't have.
I could find it or I could find it later. But
Yeah.
where Swamiji was saying, I don't know, but I think it has to do with the consciousness of the person. So I don't think there's one answer to all this. People ask a lot, and I was going to talk about all this later anyway, as I talk actually about dying. What about drugs? What about we need to give people a lot of pain medicines or sometimes things to paralyze people because they're fighting a respirator or there's so much that goes on. I just don't want to be sidetracked. In an intensive care unit. So I think, Master says there are as many paths as there are souls, that every soul is unique. So the story of your father is not, it's always mind-blowing when those things happen. But then when we sit down and we think about it or listening to Robin's story, what a beautiful story, but is it really surprising? No, it's not surprising because we know, I said the first week for people who would remember, within minutes of Swami Kriyananda passing. And this is true because as soon as Asha called me, I ran to her house. Many of you will remember we started knocking on doors that night for people who lived in the community. And we did this impromptu kirtan that went on all night in the little temple there. So then we just passed the harmonium. Sharmila, were you there? Yeah, we passed, it was very special. We passed the harmonium around so anybody could, I don't know who was there and who wasn't, but all night we did that. But people would call or they would show up and they would say, Swamiji just came to me. Swamiji just came to me. Then we realized it was all over the world. So people get free of these bodies and that soul I always do have the image of a compressed air container because you can compress air down to 1 cubic foot of air. I mean, I don't remember the number right now in science, somebody might know it, but if you release that valve, that air just it expands not to an infinity, but enormously. And I just feel like, well, that's what happens with these souls. So your father, you know, like you said, we're existing on so many planes and nothing really happens when we die. So Kiana, who is the fiance of their son who passed with Devin, I mean, she said he's come to her so many times. And of course, and she's saying like, he really came, but we know that. We don't doubt her at all. So it's a lot of answers to all of what you raised, but I'm going to paraphrase St. Anthony here. I've seen it, you know. I mean, I just know, not paraphrasing him, I'm quoting him, but it's for a different purpose. But I've seen these things now. You just spend a couple of weeks in an intensive care unit with your eyes open and, you know, or there's no convincing here. You know, Robin's stories are real story. And I mean, Robin, Michelle and Robin and just all of the stories that we're hearing. So, yeah. So the respirator wouldn't have to get in the way, is all I'm saying. It was a long answer to say the respirator doesn't have to be in the way. But the stories were important.
Very important. Go
Very
ahead.
close to it.
Yeah, just hold the mic very close
Okay.
to your mouth, Prana.
I have many stories about it, but I think I would pick the one which is very similar to that. So I was very close to my mom. My mom was kind of a person who would say, everything is going to be okay. Don't worry about it. You know, things would be okay. And this is around 2015. I had a dream, which, you know, dreams are generally when you are in a dream, you feel like it's true, right? And in that dream, I imagined she died. And when I woke up, I was totally sweaty, right? Like I was like, what the hell just happened? I called her up and she was like, I'm fine. And I realized like me being in US and she being in India, it's not gonna work. Her time is limited, I have to go back. I packed everything up. I have to leave my job, 2015, went to India with my family. Fast
Prana,
forward,
keep the microphone.
okay, fast forward, things weren't working out with me, my wife and daughter being there, you know, family issues generally. Son trying to live in the same family with parents, with sister, it kind of is confusing. Anyway, I came back to US and it's funny, I was having a talk with her over Zoom or something, and she wasn't feeling well. And I had a feeling in my heart that it's probably the last time you would see her in body. I was like, no, it's just you thinking too much. And next day morning, I wake up and I'm telling to my wife, I think she's dying. And she doesn't believe me. She's like, okay, let's call at your house. And nobody picks up the phone, right? And I'm like, I'm sure she is dying. And still nobody picks up the call. So we call someone who is a neighbor and ask him to check. And he's like, you know, an ambulance was there at your home. You should call after some time. And then I call my brother. I'm like, I think mom is dead. And he's like, are you kidding me? I just had a talk with her yesterday. You know, I'm like, I'm sure she died. And I had this deep down here inside, when you know it's the truth, and it is the truth, and whatever people are saying, you don't believe it, right? I had that feeling that she is moved on, right? She had a fall and she died on the spot, maybe 30 minutes or so, she passed away. Now I go to India, very same, like 3 hours away. So 7 o'clock, I talk to my brother. 3 hours later, I'm on the flight and I'm sitting at the airport having intense detachment to everything. Like what are these people seeing on the phone? You know, you are having like questioning every part of life, like
Yeah.
what's the meaning of life? She was supposed to come to US after a week. I had everything in her control. I was supposed to shift to California. We would have a good family here, and you know, things didn't work out the way we planned, right? I'm sure that's probably the case. You folks are into it, right? Where you want to have a certain outcome which is not coming, right?
Yeah.
Because someone is showing you the other part, right? I reach India, I see my mom's dead body, not able to sleep, not able to eat, not able to be consoled. 24 hours of same intense situation. I didn't had any experience what you said, but I remember the next day or the next day, there was a huge rainfall. And I just realized that I can't take it anymore. I have to go out. I went for a walk in the rain and had this intense experience that everything is a part of me. Everything. And that's when I stopped the consoling part. Like I left, she is a part of me. Because if I see her, I see she is in me right now. Even you all are a part of me. And that experience went for like 2 or 3 hours. And I was like so filled with joy, so filled with like compassion that, you know, that thing is coming because of my attachment to her. I have to let her go, right? And that was it. Like and after that, I got onto the spiritual path. Like suffering brings you closer to God, right? So I think that's what my story was in terms of going through that intense attachment, releasing it, and then going on. And pretty recently, like in COVID, I got COVID the first day. I didn't took any medicines. 4:30 a.m. I'm like having a very hard time breathing, and it was a mild COVID variant, right? And I'm either in sleep or I don't know what it was. And I heard somebody say, Pranav, it's time for you to go. And I asked, what about my wife and daughter? And I heard the voice say, it's a dream. And I said, okay, let's go. And you won't believe, in an hour or two, I was completely get going of without any COVID symptoms. My fever, everything went away. Hard to explain. But I think it is what it is. We are all manifestations of spirit.
Very powerful. Yeah. Yeah. It's sacred. So I appreciate, I mean, all of these stories, everything that's been shared. There, you know, each time, each week, when people are sharing things, I just want to acknowledge that sometimes it's hard to find words to say other than, you know, I can feel it. I can feel the truth of it. Each person sharing. Yeah, thank you.
I love the part of that. I mean, the whole story is deep and sacred and beautiful, everything you said. But that image of walking out in an Indian rain, knowing what that means, like how hard it could have been raining, and to have that in that setting, that realization, we are all a part of all that is. And we won't all have that realization, but you had it. Nobody goes anywhere. Nothing happens. She's right here. Still, she's a part of me. And I'm a part of her. That's a very beautiful, it's a gift to
Yeah.
you, but it's a gift to all of us
Yeah.
that you're sharing it.
I lost the ability to label anything. So my likes and dislikes went away.
Wow.
So I could see everyone as just what they are as an attachment. Like as a reflection of me
Yeah.
being projected.
You know, just because
well.
this discussion so feeds into the whole, I mean,
Yeah.
we're just talking about
Yeah.
the topic tonight for the talk would be dying. That's
Mm-hmm.
sort of a strange thing to try and talk about in 30 minutes, but Swamiji said an interesting thing, I think also in this essay, but I'm not sure, that just follows what you said. But I thought about this. I mean, I thought about all of us, but I also thought about Padmini because it's so poignant that he said this. And because I know that it matters to her if Swamiji says something. But he talked, and let me just parenthetically say, of course we grieve. Of course we grieve when we lose somebody. I mean, we are, after all, spiritual beings having this human experience, but we're having this human experience. So it's not like any one of us would go through something like the loss of a child or the loss of a parent, depending on whatever, or a friend, and not have some grief. But he said that grieving, which he said, I had not read this 2 weeks ago, I just want you to know, is our way of desperately not wanting to let the person go. That's a lot of what it takes care of, is it allows us to hold on. But he speaks about it in this essay as an attachment that holds the soul back, that grief has such a powerful hold on the soul that when we get clear and we can quit grieving, that the soul is then released to go on. And I don't know what you just said, Pranav, that reminded me of that, but it just feels like an important piece. It's not that we can will ourselves to quit grieving, because the grief is real. And I'm not trying to say don't feel it, but I'm also saying the other part of it, this false notion that it keeps us closer, when the way it's keeping us closer is through an attachment that holds the soul somewhere. So we owe it to the people that we love. This is why the words of our astral ascension, which, will you read it next week? The astral ascension.
Yes, yeah.
So everybody can hear it for those of you who haven't, but it's so beautiful because it helps us remember to set that soul free. And again, I can't remember, Pranav, what you said, but about attachment, all of your attachment was released. And I think that set your mother free in a different way than to be able to come to you later, be with us, have us feel them. We have to release them to allow them to come back. It's an interesting, in this body dilemma. It's a big dilemma. Sharmila, yeah, wait, yeah, I want you to have the microphone.
I just wanted to make a comment about what you just said because it seems so important. And one of the things that I experienced recently in the loss of a client of mine was that in releasing her, I had the feeling that I would forget her, that I would move on and forget her. And it was an interesting thought because of the client relationship with her on Zoom for the last 3 years, I didn't see her in person. I didn't know she had died. When I called her because she was late for an appointment, her daughter answered the phone, and that's how I came to know. And I felt grief, but I also felt joy for her, knowing her. She was an atheist, believed nothing. But really what strikes me is that sense about letting go, truly letting go and living, going on living, knowing
that I'm helping her soul be free, still there was that feeling. I don't know that I could say it's exactly guilt, but just that sense that I would move on and not remember her.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make that comment because I think there's a tug there in that letting go process.
Mhm, mhm.
I think that's very important. What you're saying, really important, is that suffering is one of the ways that we have of holding on. And I appreciate what you're saying, and I think it's very important for all of us at some time, is that we actually think if we quit suffering, it brings about this feeling of guilt at times. Like I should still be, if I really loved them, then I would still suffer. I mean, that's why they call it survivor's guilt. You know, it's very important.
As you're aware, we lost her son
Closer, yeah.
in December. He was very spiritual. We used to talk about it a lot. And I lost my mom in March. And he actually was communicating with my mom.
Wow.
So I'm grieving. I know he's in a good place.
Mhm,
We all know he's in a good place.
mhm.
It's just hard to accept that we can't hold him
Yeah,
or talk to him anymore.
yeah.
So I think we have to go through a grieving process
Mhm,
to relieve ourselves. We know he's okay.
mhm.
And it may be selfish,
Mm.
but I think it's a process that we have to have. But I know that he used to console me on my mom.
Mm. Mm.
So this is very difficult for the whole family.
Yeah,
But we'll get through it as a
Yeah.
family.
yeah.
And I know that, like I said before, we believe that he guided us here.
Yeah, yeah,
So that's all I have to say.
yeah. Thank you, Val. You know, well, Shanti was talking about it. I mean, I'm trying to think of, it's just, we do have to grieve. We have to grieve. I mean, that is part of a release. When Dhananjaya, when you were sharing about your tears, what came to me is, it's a way of it is a way of honoring the life and the relationship. It is. And tears, they're cleansing, they're clearing of energy that in the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, there's an expression of what good suppression. We can't suppress our experiences. The fact that you all came here and that he guided you here, and I have felt that all along that he did, that, you're in a really beautiful setting to help you grieve and work with this reality, right? So what I feel is that what I was going to say is you're not fighting it. And I don't mean that you don't have moments. I don't mean that, but you're here, and all of you, I feel your sincerity to work with this in the best way. And there's no shame in tears and sadness and crying. It's so soon, it's so recent. So I think that, and nevertheless, as Shanti said, and I will read it next week, the astral ascension ceremony, it's a practice. It's a practice, right? It's so a daily practice. I mean, that's the thing, is to be able to say, I know all this, and I know you know it, and I know you were teaching me it, and you're still teaching me, and I miss you. I miss you. Right? It's just real. That's what Shanti said earlier, of like, sometimes, I mean, the finality of it, of that person no longer being in a body, is profound. It really is. I mean, that is my experience. It really is. And it is quite a journey to navigate it, integrate it. We can get there. That's why we're teaching the class, right? Is that you are getting there. You are getting there. But thank you for saying that. Yeah, there no shame in the realness of loss and sadness. It's just very real. And it can be cleansing. It's my experience in yoga. We say that tears are a release of energy. They are. Yeah.
I'd like to say to 4 of you, it has been profoundly meaningful to me and to this group that you're here.
Yeah.
It was such an experience for me last week. Forgive me with my name thing. I'm going to beg an age. I'm going to cash in one of my age-related points here. Is your name Nathan? Yes. So that hug that we shared last week was so extraordinary. I mean, it really affected me. And our conversation at the end of the session. And I just, when you say, but we'll make it, you are really deeply, beautifully making it.
You are.
And you're giving something to everybody in this room. What courage to follow that guidance and come here. And to open your hearts to us, because you each have. And anyway, I just wanted to say that to you. I'm very grateful that you came. I'll bet most people in this room would say that.
Yeah. Me too.
We are too.
We are too. Yeah.
In fact, we should see a picture of him next week at some point.
That would be lovely. I would love to see that. Yeah. Will Kiana be coming next week? Do you know?
Yeah, the job. But she was telling me
Oh, yeah. Mike, for the people there.
that the day of my son's passing, a company called her for a job
Wow.
that she didn't even interview for.
Wow.
And she told them that she couldn't talk to them, and this kind of the circumstances. And they she recently reached out to them to see if they're still interested, and they said yes, and they were very interested, and she wanted to come for the interview. And she said, she had a dream, and she had a dream that she went to the interview and Devin was there waiting for her. And he said, told her she was going to do great, and they're waiting for her.
Oh.
And she had the interview, and she said he wouldn't talk to her in the dream. And so she was kind of aggravated with him. And she said, okay, well, goodbye, Devin. But then he said, no, I'll walk you to the car.
Oh.
And so anyway, she felt that he was with her. In fact, when she was at her job, she felt a double tap on her shoulder. And she turned around and no one was there. And she asked everyone, did you just tap me? And they go, no. So she feels it was Devin telling her, you're going to do great on this interview. She felt he was at that interview with her.
Wow.
Yeah, they have a really powerful connection.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
two of them.
Yeah. It's amazing.
They were soulmates,
Yeah.
definitely.
You can feel it.
So, I'm supposed to be speaking for the rest of this session about dying, actually about dying. And it's huge because
Yeah.
There's like, what does it mean to be dying? What is the person who's leaving experiencing? And then there's, what are we experiencing as we're with somebody who's leaving? And in what ways can we help them through that transition? I realized all day today, I visited this frequently. It's too big for a half hour
Yeah.
in a way, or
Yeah.
45 minutes. So I can speak a little bit about some points, but they're just that, they're just points and I would probably speak more from my own experience over the years about being with so many people who have passed, or I can open this up to questions specifically about that. So let me just say this, because the idea just came to me. Let me share one or two stories and my reflections on them. And then if there are questions, we'll answer them, specific questions. But how do we do this? How do we do that? What does this mean? When I started medical school up here at Stanford, most of you know that I came up here to go to medical school. I had already been a nurse for about 12 years. And I was an ICU, intensive care unit, coronary care unit nurse for most of that time. So when I started medical school, I was already 32 and the people around me were 21. I had helped many people live through an intensive care unit experience or die in the experience. And these were 21-year-olds, most of whom had very little life experience. So our third year of medical school, so I was very, very comfortable in hospitals. It felt like home to me, and nobody around me was. And when we started doing our clinical work, one of the first experiences that we had, and I remember that a friend of mine and myself, we chose to do our medical rotation, 3 months of medicine. It's one of the big rotations over at the VA hospital, as opposed to doing it at Stanford. We made that choice for a lot of reasons, but anyway, we did. And one night, a woman who I had become very good friends with, and I'm still very good friends with her. She's the woman who sent me the $5,000 when I was yelling at God. Many of you know that story. If you want me to stay here, send me $5,000. And later there was a check in my mailbox. That was Susan. But Susan came and got me. She was beside herself because there was a patient that she had, wasn't my patient, at the VA, who everybody knew was going to die, but she did not know what to do with this man or how to be with him, and nobody was helping her. It was her first clinical rotation. We just did our medical rotation right out of 2 years of classes and clinics. And so she asked me if I would come and help her. I was sort of just the next medical student, but I wasn't, because I'd already been in the hospital so much. And I remember going to the bedside with her, and there was this older man. It was a VA hospital, and it was mostly older men. And he was, in fact, very close to dying, but he was suffering. He did not know how to die. And I knew that right away, but that's not anything she knew. She felt like she was being called to help him. And so I was able to help her. I said to her, let's get an IV in him and let's get some medicine that we might need. But then I sat and I spoke with him. And you know, now we're here, even here, we would all know some of this would be important. But to a 23-year-old, you know, sort of coming in off the streets, if you will, she just had no idea. But I remember sitting down with him and just putting my hands on his arm and talking to him and telling him that it was okay to go, that his family was there, that we would bring them in, that they were all supportive of his leaving, that we would make sure that he was comfortable, but that it was really fine for him to leave at this point. And I remember he was holding on to my hand very tightly. I mean, all these stories are so poignant, so I remember them very well. And I said to him, would you like a little bit of medicine just to be able to calm down? And he shook his head yes, but he would not let go of my hand. And then we called his family and 2 children, and 2 children were there, and I think a grandchild. And I said to them, why don't you let your father know that you're okay with his leaving now? And they did. They spoke some words to him. And now we have this IV in, and we gave him just a touch of Valium at the time. And within 2 hours, he was gone. And it was very poignant. It doesn't maybe sound that way here, but all by way of saying he needed permission. He needed to know that his children were fine with him leaving, that he wasn't leaving them, that they were supporting him. It was her first very important lesson. And for me, I realized how much I could help my classmates just grow into this experience of what all of the different ways that we help people die, and that we can help them die by offering them the appropriate medicines when they need them, that we can help them die by literally giving them our permission to go. And this does not need to be children and parents. It can be the other way around. It can be any relationship, that the people who are closest to the person sometimes need to say to them, it's okay for you to go. And so I'm just picking and choosing stories. I'll just share a couple of other short stories. Then I do want to open it up to questions, because I mean, the subject, as I said, is just, it's too big. There's a man who's part of our congregation. He might be with us right now. His name is Yudhishthira. He was going to be watching this from home. If you're out there, Yudhishthira, hello. But his wife, Christy, passed 3 years ago. I'm trying to remember when it was, but about 3 years ago, maybe.
2018, I believe.
2018,
December.
so longer ago. Okay, so 5 years ago.
I think so.
Anyway, I just happened to be able to be with her the night that she was leaving. They lived down in Scotts Valley. And there were a few people who were coming to see her. I mean, it was all beautiful. Everybody loved Christy. Yudhishthira, who was Doug at the time, was being just lovely with her. But people were coming into the room, so many people at some point. Soon it turned into, I remember there was one man there who was telling family stories. Oh, my grandma, and he was telling all these. And finally, I had to say to everybody, there's 2 things I want to tell about Christy and that passing. I asked people to either be more quiet and energetically be with her. You could chant Om, you could just pray, you could sing some of Swamiji's more inward music, but it didn't feel right to be sitting around in that room, laughing and telling stories that had nothing to do with her. It just felt off to me. Felt like when you're with somebody whose soul is trying to leave and they're wrestling with it, because it's not always swirling, beautiful astral colors and It's just
Right.
not
Right.
always that.
Right.
I mean, my second husband, who was a deeply spiritual man, he fought right up to the last minute. He did not want to leave, and he was not going to leave that body. I mean, I actually wound up giving him a fair amount of, I had to, sedating drugs. He was standing up and lifting the bed up with him. He was determined to stay in the body and fight. It was his nature. I mean, that's exactly who Barry was. You've all heard me tell stories about him. But I mean, so it's just not always simple and easy. But I do feel that it serves the soul. I've just seen it so many times. If we stay conscious and clear about the energy that we're bringing into the room. And I've seen again and again, so I'm just sharing randomly with you, and anybody can tell me if you've had other experiences. It's one thing to have a CD playing in the background with Swamiji chanting Om. It's another thing if you think you want to bring rock and roll into the room. It's just energetically off. And that what I have experienced is that the soul is so near to us right then, that the soul, not the person, not the personality, that my experience has been, if I think something, many of you have heard me say this, they receive it. If I give a virtual hug, rather than going up and grabbing that body in that moment, they receive that. And when my sister was passing, she was 42, I think, my mother came to me and said, I've just told everybody they're not allowed to come into the room. And I said, why did you do that? And she said, Gwen, my sister, just seems to get agitated if it's anybody but you. And I said, I would rather speak to, I had two brothers, there was a big extended family there, and explain to them how to be near Gwen, rather than take away the gift of being near somebody we love. It would be terrible for my brothers to feel they couldn't say goodbye to their sister. So I brought them in and I said to them, don't touch her, but hug her with your heart. She'll feel it. Don't speak to her, but speak to her. Silently send your thoughts because she can receive them. And she will know just what you're saying to her. So everybody was able to be with her in that way, not in a loud, physically holding on or raucous way, but rather with a sensitivity at a soul level. So everybody who lived could feel like they were able to be with her and say goodbye to her and help her leave. Master says over and over in many of his teachings, and Swamiji says it and shares it with us, hearing is the last sense to go. That if you quietly chant Om, you can even just do it mentally, or some tune that was important to that particular person, that they will continue to hear that you don't stand at the bedside or wherever somebody is and talk about them. You don't do that because they can hear you right up till the very last minute, even after the heart has stopped, because the soul stays there. Swamiji tells an amazing story. I don't know if it's in this essay. If it is, many of you will have read it, about Robert E. Lee's mother and how she was, because the question that he was asked is, cremation better than burial? And without going into his whole answer, because we'll run out of time, one of the stories that he tells in answering that is that Robert E. Lee's mother died. Everybody thought she was dead. They put her in a coffin and closed the coffin. She was about to be buried.
Mm.
And then she had been pronounced dead, but she wakes up and she's in the coffin. And she realizes that they're about to bury her, but now she's alive again. And she starts pounding, screaming and pounding on the coffin. And they hear her and open the coffin. That was before Robert E. Lee, before she was pregnant with him.
Wow.
It's a very powerful story, actually. But all by way of saying, be mindful of what you say and do when somebody has seemingly left a body, and particularly what we say, even if we're near that body, even if they are gone, even if they're dead, they're pronounced dead and it's real. But be very careful what you say and that you share uplifting words and loving words and words. You know, every story is different. So I want you to really be thoughtful about how you take this into. Most of the time when people are pronounced dead, they're dead. That's the truth. But it's just interesting to hear, I mean, some of what can happen and why we need to keep communicating with the soul, even long after people are gone, because the soul can stay with the body for a while. There was one other thing that just came to mind that I wanted to say, but it'll either come back to me or it doesn't matter. But how to be with somebody as they're passing, soon after they've passed, how to be with them while there's still some life force in the body, even if they've been pronounced dead and even if they are in fact dead. And really how we can help people pass were just a few of the things that I wanted to share with you. And yeah, let me just stop there. Does anybody have particular questions or comments that they'd like to make?
I have one comment. I'm curious. When the soul leaves the body, so there are people that claim to be mediums that see souls. And what do you think about that?
I'm certain there are people, remember this story that I told the very first week? You may not, because there was a lot of energy and feeling in the room, but about the British man who was an avowed atheist. He wanted nothing to do with God, and his son was killed in a car crash right in front of him. His son and his grandchildren, his daughter-in-law, they were all killed in a head-on collision. And a medium basically came and knocked at his door some months later and said, I have a message from your son. 3 or 4 times he threw her out. He was enraged with her until she said, give me a minute. And she shared things with him that only his son would have known. There would be no other way. And then through that medium, he was able to connect with his son. I mean, his whole experience of life, death, of a soul's reality changed. So I am certain, I know for sure there are people who can connect with people once they've left the body, and it's genuine. And I'm pretty much just as certain that there are people who claim to be able to do that who aren't really doing that. So we have to feel our way into that, and we have to look for, and also I will say, and this is very complicated, there are dark forces who connect with people after they've left their body, who come not with good or loving intentions. So it's very complicated, and we need to be
Discerning. I think
discerning
my
together.
mic's not working, James. Is it working? Okay, yeah, discerning.
Discerning is a very good word. If somebody were to approach us, I would be very thoughtful because some of those darker forces that come, they can do a lot of harm. And they're real too. I mean, we have all different names for that in life, you know, from Satan to many other words, but this is a huge question, very big arena, but Yogananda has told us over and over, since everything has been manifested from, and I talked about this that first week, though who would remember that at this point, but every single thing in creation comes from that one super conscious state. That means even those people who are bad people doing, you know, they're people who are behaving badly, let me put it that way, or what we call Satan, I mean, the dark side of life. It's still all a part of that superconscious state, but it's a lower force, a lower aspect of it, but it's real. And Yogananda says, I now add my testimony to many great saints who have come before me. Satan exists. He's not just a figment of people's imagination. So I'm saying it to you only if you would go to seek that out. Be very careful, is what I would say. Yeah. Wait for them.
I am a medium, and I will say that when you are going to someone who's a medium, they should be drawing a circle of light and healing so that there's a specific container around you to prevent any negative energies coming in. And that my experience is that negative energies attached to fear, anxiety, and hatred and stress. And so, and mostly fear and anxiety and hatred. And so if there was some conflict or negativity, those entities will attach to that, whether it's the person in a body or a person not in a body. So those are my experiences. And if then when you're done with the session, to open the session of light and healing, so then you can release that circle. That ceremonial connection with people is very important, really critical. If you're going to be reading a spirit that's passed away. So that's, I just want to share that because I
No,
think
thank
it's
you
a
for
very
saying that.
important
Yeah.
addition to if people are really true mediums and not trying to take advantage of people.
Yeah.
And would you say, because this is something I wanted to add, and I think it's important, that if, I mean, you are a medium, and I'm sorry that it didn't come to me to invite you in sooner, but I appreciate what you just said. And I was thinking to say, if it's a medium who's connecting you in a positive way, in a way that would be healing or uplifting, that we should feel that. We should feel safe. We should feel in love. Is that accurate?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because if they're not focused on love, and I have known many mediums myself, some are not focused on love, they're focused on power.
Right.
And they're focused on showing their power.
Yeah.
Those that are focused on love, you feel safe, you feel secure, you feel embraced by their caring. And then when you're out of the circle, you'll feel usually a great relief from that experience. So, and a great connection. So if it's very positive at the end, then you know that it's been a real experience.
Yeah.
A positive
A
experience.
real positive, because
Yeah.
they're real. Swami, this is a little different, but it's telling and relevant that Swamiji one time wanted to have an experience. He wanted, just was like an intellectual thing with a disembodied being. So he literally went to sleep one night and he invited that being in, but it was a very dark being, which he didn't know. He was being haphazard in a way. And he realized very quickly that he was in a battle with that being and he was going to lose. And he felt that. And he immediately started calling for Master, was his guru, Yogananda. And he started just screaming for Master. And he said in an instant that disembodied being lost all power because Yogananda intervened. But it can be a dangerous to the psyche and to the soul experience. So,
Well, I have experienced a lot of spirits because I clear out houses and clear out ghosts and things. And I have experienced Satan came to me one time, and I looked at him and I just said, you don't belong here. And I sent a beam of love and it blasted him out of the room. So the one thing about negative spirits is that I've learned over all these years is that if you send love to the negative spirit, they will be repelled by it because they identify with darkness and they identify with death and they identify with anything that's considered in society as very negative. That's what they identify with.
Yeah.
So when you send them love, and so when he called in Yogananda, he called in a beam of
Absolutely.
love
and light.
and light.
Yeah, it's true.
And they will not, they usually do not come back then because they know, oh, that's too much for me.
You know, we're speaking about this in this very particular way, but I can't help but comment that the Sunday service, not this past week, but the week before, actually it was when I was online with you folks, right?
Yes.
And it was the light, and the light shineth
Mhm.
in the darkness, but the darkness comprehended it not. And it's just was John's way, really. It was the Gospel of St. John. It's a quote from there of this very thing, you know, and what happens, the darkness is really repelled by light. So anyway, yeah, thank you for that. That's great.
Mm.
Any other comments or questions? Anybody?
I'll just say very briefly, I thought it was so meaningful, Shanti, what you just said about helping people pass by speaking directly about the experience. And when James's mother was dying and we had hospice, there was a certain point, I mean, it was a little while before she went, they couldn't quite tell, which is often the case, right? And James's mother at this point was upstairs, we were downstairs, and I knew she could hear us. And the nurse was saying, well, you know, it's close now. It's close. And I think she could sense my discomfort of like, she can probably hear us. And she goes, and it's very good for her to hear us talking about that.
Hmm.
And I thought, oh, and she said, yeah, it's helpful for her to know. We know it's close now. So that was meaningful when you said that. I found that to be true. And the other thing, at a certain point, we brought her downstairs. She was in the living room and all the kids were there, lots of people there, right? And, you know, family stories, things like that. And the hospice nurse said at one point, I think she's having too good of a time to go, right? She's enjoying all her children being here. And so similar to what you were saying, like it's good, but you might transition, you might like bring, you know, just shift a little bit. But at a certain point, the day that she passed, James's sister said, because it was like, okay, I guess it's not going to happen. We're all been here a long time. Life is going on. It's really hard to leave. That's a very hard thing.
Yeah.
But one of the sisters said, okay, I guess I got to go home. I got to go back to work. So love you, Mom. I'll see you later. Right. She goes. Two of the brothers said, I guess we'll go for a bike ride. They go out on a bike ride, just like
She
that.
left.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, just like the hospice nurse said, right? Like, well, she didn't want to leave while you were here. She didn't want to go if you're here. So, anyway, that just came to mind when you were saying that.
I think part of why I had so much trouble in a way imagining, like just, it was hard to figure out how to focus
Yeah.
in such a short time tonight. But part of it is because no matter what we say here, it takes a kind of tuning in
Mhm.
at the moment. Who is this soul? And, you know,
Right.
and I know you know this. So Yogananda says there are as many different paths as there are souls. Like every one of us is unique. And when we're with people, I have really felt that people don't like to be touched very much. You know, Ronnie, we mentioned Ronnie, who this woman who moved into the community to pass. She had been involved with Ananda, but didn't live in our community. And she just arranged it. She wanted to die in our community. And she loved having anybody and everybody come to visit her.
Mhm.
And I was saying to myself, now this, I got to write out rules for when Shanti is leaving. No, I do not want all those
Right.
visitors. If you come to my bedside, you stay quiet. You even chant Om silently. And if nobody was in the room, you know what Ronnie did? She wanted football on the television, football. And I kept saying to her, Ronnie, is this good for you? Oh, yeah, she said, I loved it. It's like, please, nobody put on a football game. You know, so it's just interesting to stay tuned in and aware and follow somebody's
Right,
lead
that's
and to
right.
be listening carefully enough to know she's not leaving while we're here. Remember, I told you the story. I got the call that my stepfather had died. And I kept saying to the nurse or whoever she was, are you sure? Because I could not believe that he would have left when I wasn't with him. But in fact, he could only leave when I
Right.
wasn't with him.
That's right.
So I just listen. That's what I would say. Listen. Everybody has their own way that they need to go. Some of them need us to be there. Some of them need us not to be there. Some of them just want the football game playing in the background. And I mean, I'll tell you, I'd be out of my body in a heartbeat because I just couldn't imagine being around that. So it's, you know, it's good to leave a note. I have instructions written now. I'm not kidding. I'm refining them. I'm going to give them to Lakshmi because I mean this. Yeah. She's 35, so we're all counting on you being here for a while. All right, friends, why don't we just sit quietly just for a moment? Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. We'll see you next week for our last session. Forward to it.
Yeah.